I live on the west side of Madison, in a neighborhood that feels steady and lived in, the kind of place where seasons matter and routines shape your days. Maple trees arch over the streets, their leaves scattering across sidewalks in the fall and casting soft shade in the summer. In the evenings, children ride their bikes in loose circles, laughter echoing between houses, until porch lights flicker on one by one and parents call them home. It is not a perfect place, but it feels safe, and safety is something I have learned to value deeply. My mornings begin before the sun fully settles into the sky. The house is quiet except for the hum of the coffee maker and the faint creak of the floorboards as I move through the kitchen. Backpacks sit neatly by the door, shoes lined up beneath the bench, lunches half prepared from the night before. There is a familiar rhythm to it all, one built on repetition and responsibility. Every small action carries the same purpose, making sure my children step into the world feeling protected, grounded, and loved. My name is Lauren Whitaker. I am 36 years old, a mother of two, and a woman who believed she had already paid the price for the mistakes she made long ago. I carry my past quietly, like a scar that no longer bleeds but still aches when pressed. I do not speak of it often, and most days I convince myself that it no longer defines me. I have worked hard to build a life that feels honest and stable, one that reflects who I am now rather than who I once was. 2 years ago, I married Daniel Collins in a small lakeside park near Lake Mendota. The water was calm that day, sunlight rippling across its surface, and a light breeze moved through the trees as we exchanged vows. There were no grand decorations or elaborate plans. It was simple, warm, and full of quiet hope. The kind of wedding that feels less like a performance and more like a promise meant to last. Daniel was everything I had learned to want after my divorce. He was steady when life felt uncertain, thoughtful in ways that showed up in daily actions rather than grand gestures, and endlessly patient with my children, Noah and Emily. He sat at the kitchen table helping with math homework, packed lunches without being asked, and stood on the sidelines of soccer fields every weekend, cheering just as loudly as any biological parent would. He never made them feel like an obligation. He made them feel chosen. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine permanence, not just love, but longevity. Not just survival, but belonging. Our home felt complete in a way I had not expected to feel again. Adoption felt like the final step. A promise on paper that matched what we were already living every day under one roof. Or so I thought. The conversation about adoption began on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that usually felt unhurried and safe. The kids were in their rooms, doors half closed, the soft sounds of a cartoon drifting down the hallway. Sunlight filtered through the living room windows, catching dust in the air and warming the folded blankets on the couch. It should have been an ordinary moment. Daniel stood near the dining table, folding laundry with deliberate precision. Each shirt was smoothed twice before being stacked, each sock aligned carefully with its pair. The movements felt controlled, almost tense, as if he were focusing on the task to avoid saying something else. I noticed the silence between us stretching longer than usual, thick with something unspoken. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but distant. He said he needed more time before moving forward with the adoption. The words landed lightly at first, almost casual, and I let out a small laugh, assuming this was nerves. The process was serious after all, and Daniel had always been thoughtful. I reached for reassurance, expecting him to smile back. He did not. His eyes stayed fixed on the stack of laundry in his hands, serious and guarded. That was the moment the air in the room shifted. The ease of the afternoon slipped away, replaced by a quiet tension I could not ignore. He looked up at me then and asked a single question, carefully chosen and quietly devastating. He wanted to know if there was anything else from my past that I had not told him. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My stomach tightened, my breath shortened, and the room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls had inched closer. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock above the doorway, sounds that suddenly felt too loud. I knew exactly which part of my past he was circling, even though he did not name it. I told him no. Or at least, I told him what I had repeated to myself for years, that the past was handled. That it was closed, that it no longer mattered. The words came out steady, practiced, shaped by habit rather than truth. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting the answer without comment. He returned to folding the last shirt, his movements just as careful as before. But something essential had shifted. The warmth that usually lived between us cooled, replaced by distance and uncertainty. We were still standing in the same room, under the same roof, but for the first time, it felt like we were no longer fully on the same side. 2 days later, Daniel did not come home after work. At first, I told myself not to worry. Meetings ran late. Traffic backed up on the Beltline. Life happened. Still, as the sky darkened outside our living room windows and the clock crept past dinner time, unease settled into my chest. I fed the kids, helped with homework, and tucked them into bed, all while glancing at my phone more often than I wanted to admit. The house felt different without him, quieter, hollow. When the front door finally opened well after 9, I knew something was wrong before he said a word. Daniel stepped inside slowly, his shoulders slumped, his expression drawn in a way I had never seen before. He looked older somehow, as if the weight of the day had pressed down on him and refused to lift. He did not kiss my cheek or ask about the kids. He set his keys on the counter and stood there, breathing as if he had walked a long distance instead of driving home. He told me he had run into Mark Jensen after work. The name landed like a sudden drop in temperature. Mark was an old acquaintance from my early 20s, someone tied to a version of my life I had worked hard to leave behind. I had not thought about him in years, not intentionally, not with any desire to reopen that chapter. Hearing his name spoken aloud in our kitchen made my pulse quicken. Daniel said they had talked, not briefly, not politely. Mark had recognized my name and filled in the gaps Daniel did not know existed. He shared pieces of my past with the casual confidence of someone who believed he was simply telling the truth, without regard for the damage it might cause. Daniel repeated the details slowly, as if each one still shocked him. A charge that was later dismissed. A desperate decision I made while trying to get out of an abusive relationship. A lie on a job application that snowballed into consequences far greater than I had ever imagined. Each word felt like a door opening to a room I had sealed shut. I stood there listening, my arms wrapped tightly around myself, feeling exposed in my own home. Those moments from my past were not just mistakes. They were survival choices made in fear, in isolation, in a life where I felt trapped and invisible. I had hoped they would remain buried, understood only by the woman who lived through them. Daniel finally looked at me, his eyes clouded with confusion and hurt. His voice was low when he spoke, stripped of anger but heavy with disbelief. He said he did not know who I was anymore. The sentence hung between us, sharper than anything else he could have said. In that moment, I realized the truth had not just resurfaced. It had arrived through someone else's mouth, uncontrollable and incomplete, and it had shaken the foundation of everything we had built together. The children felt the shift before either of us said anything out loud. They noticed the silence that settled into the house like a fog, the way conversations ended too quickly, the way Daniel began to pull back without meaning to. He was still there physically, still sitting at the table and driving them to school, but something in his presence had changed. The easy warmth they were used to had been replaced by distance, and children always sensed that kind of absence. Emily was the first to ask the question. One evening as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes and asked if we were moving again. Her voice carried a quiet fear shaped by memories of boxes, new schools, and starting over. I forced a smile and told her no, even as my chest tightened at the realization that my children were already bracing for loss. Noah responded differently. He did not ask questions. He withdrew. The math worksheets that once went straight to Daniel now stayed folded in his backpack. When Daniel offered help, Noah shrugged and said he could handle it. Watching that small separation unfold hurt more than any argument could have. It was a reminder that adult conflict never stays contained. It spills into the smallest corners of a child's world. At night, when the house finally went quiet, sleep refused to come. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady ticking of the clock and the distant sound of cars passing outside. My mind replayed every decision I had made as a younger woman trying to survive without a safety net. Each memory surfaced uninvited, carrying the weight of fear, isolation, and desperation I thought I had already overcome. I was not proud of the lie that now threatened my family. Shame wrapped itself around me in the dark, heavy, and familiar. But I also knew the truth. I had faced the consequences. I had taken responsibility. I had grown into someone stronger and more careful because of it. Still, shame has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it, creeping back in when your guard is down, and reminding you how fragile peace can feel when your past collides with the present. I waited until the house was quiet. The kids were asleep, their bedroom doors closed, the familiar hush of nighttime settling over the walls. The kitchen light cast a soft glow over the table, highlighting the small scratches in the wood left behind by years of family meals and homework sessions. I asked Daniel to sit with me, and this time, my voice did not waver. I took a deep breath and told him everything. Not the careful version. Not the edited one. The real story spoken without shortcuts or excuses. I talked about fear, the kind that keeps you awake at night and convinces you that survival matters more than reputation. I spoke about desperation and how loneliness can distort judgment, making one wrong decision feel insignificant in the moment. I admitted how trapped I felt back then, how small my world had become, and how I believed there was no one coming to save me. I told him about rebuilding my life in Milwaukee, starting over with nothing but determination and shame folded quietly into my pocket. I described the long hours, the second chances I earned slowly, and the way motherhood changed everything inside me. Becoming a mother gave me clarity, purpose, and a line I would never cross again. It taught me accountability, strength, and the courage to grow beyond my worst mistake. The words poured out steadily, even when my hands trembled. My voice shook near the end, but my posture stayed firm. For the first time since this truth resurfaced, I felt honest instead of defensive. Vulnerable, but not weak. I was no longer hiding behind silence or fear. I was standing fully in who I had become. This is also where I want to pause and say this. If this story is touching something inside you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to True Life Voices Stories. Your support keeps stories like this alive. The silence after my confession stretched longer than I expected. Daniel finally exhaled, a slow, uneven breath that sounded like he had been holding it in for days. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of defensiveness, and for the first time since everything began unraveling, honest. He admitted that he was afraid. Not angry. Not judgmental. Afraid. He talked about legal complications he did not fully understand and the fear of being blindsided by something he could not control. He said the idea of adoption carried weight that felt overwhelming, not because of the children, but because of the permanence of it. Once the papers were signed, there would be no turning back, no undoing the choice if something went wrong. Daniel explained that trust made him feel secure, and right now his sense of trust felt shaken. He did not accuse me or raise his voice. Instead, he spoke carefully, as if choosing each word to avoid causing more harm. He said he needed to feel certain, grounded, and protected before stepping into something that would define the rest of his life. As I listened, something shifted inside me. I realized that this moment was not only about my past resurfacing. It was about his fear of vulnerability, of fully opening himself to a future that required emotional risk. Adoption meant loving without an exit plan, choosing permanence without guarantees. In that clarity, I understood that we were both standing at the edge of something terrifying, each of us afraid for different reasons, and both of us needing to decide whether courage would outweigh fear. I drove downtown to the attorney's office near the Wisconsin State Capitol, the streets quiet in the late afternoon. Sunlight glinted off the glass buildings, and the occasional honk or hurried footstep reminded me of the life moving outside while I tried to untangle mine. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and leather-bound law books, a calm contrast to the storm of emotions churning inside me. The attorney, a composed woman with sharp eyes and a measured voice, listened as I recounted everything, the resurfaced past, Daniel's fear, the adoption, and the uncertainty hanging over our family. She reviewed every document, every detail, and finally, she told me the truth I had hoped to hear. My past, legally speaking, could not stop the adoption. My choices, my mistakes, and even the lie that haunted me did not have the power to undo the family we had built. But her calm assessment came with a stark reality. Legally, I could proceed, but emotionally Daniel had to make his own choice. No law, no paperwork, no reassurance could force him to step forward willingly. The decision had to come from his heart. That evening, after driving home through the rain-slicked streets, I sat down with him at the kitchen table. The kids were already in bed, their soft breathing a reminder of what was at stake. I looked at Daniel and spoke clearly, without hesitation or pleading. I told him that I would not beg him to love my children fully. They deserved certainty, stability, and the reassurance of being chosen without doubt. For the first time in weeks, I felt a quiet strength settle into me. Even if Daniel's choice was uncertain, I could stand on my own. I could protect my children. I could honor the life I had carefully built, no matter the outcome. In that moment, I was grounded, resolute, and ready to face whatever came next. For 3 weeks, the house felt emptier than I had ever known it. Daniel stayed with his sister in Appleton, leaving me alone with the kids and the echo of tension that still lingered in the walls. Mornings were quieter, the absence of his voice at the breakfast table both strange and strangely liberating. I brewed coffee, packed backpacks, and guided Noah and Emily through their routines with a sense of focus that felt sharper than it had in months. The quiet gave me space to breathe. I drove the kids to school through familiar streets lined with elm trees and parked cars, waving to neighbors I had long ignored. Even in the small errands, picking up groceries, preparing dinner, folding laundry, I began to notice details I had forgotten to appreciate. The warm sunlight hitting the kitchen counter, the sound of Emily singing in the back seat, the way Noah's laughter filled the room with light. Slowly the household's rhythm returned, stitched together by routine and small moments of joy. Being on my own reminded me of who I truly was. I did not need Daniel as approval or affirmation to navigate the challenges of motherhood or to make decisions for our children. I remembered the resilience that had carried me through divorce, through rebuilding my life, and through facing my past. Distance, painful as it was, had granted clarity. I could stand firmly for myself and for my children, grounded in my own strength, while giving Daniel the space he needed to confront his fears. By the end of those 3 weeks, I felt steadier, more certain of my values, and more aware of the boundaries that would protect both my children and myself. The distance had taught me that sometimes love and courage require space, and that healing often begins when you remember the power you already hold. Daniel returned on a Thursday afternoon, and the rain followed him all the way from Appleton. Drops tapped against the windshield as I waited by the front window, watching him step out of the car, shoulders hunched, coat soaked, hands tucked into his pockets. The air smelled of wet asphalt and fresh earth, and the rhythmic patter of rain against the roof mirrored the tension in my chest. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The house felt smaller, as if it were holding its breath alongside me. When he finally stepped inside, Daniel's eyes met mine, and I could see the weight he had carried etched across his face. He apologized, not the casual surface-level apology, but one that reached deeper. He admitted that he had allowed fear to outweigh love, that he had let uncertainty and doubt guide his actions instead of trust and commitment. The words were heavy but sincere, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of the warmth returning between us. He told me he had gone to therapy during his time away. He had confronted the worries he had buried, faced the insecurities he had ignored, and listened to himself honestly for the first time. It was not an easy process for him, and his voice carried the weight of introspection and vulnerability. Then, with a hesitancy that spoke volumes about the growth he had undergone, Daniel asked the question I had been waiting for and dreading all at once. He wanted to know if I would still consider adoption. The question was careful, deliberate, and full of hope, as if he were testing not just the legality of the process, but the emotional readiness of both of us. In that moment, I realized that the choice he made today could finally close the distance between us and open a new chapter for our family, a chapter built on honesty, courage, and the willingness to face fear together. The courthouse had that familiar mix of scents, old paper, polished wood, and a faint hint of floor cleaner that made the place feel sterile yet official. The echo of footsteps on tile bounced between high ceilings, punctuated by murmured conversations and the occasional rustle of files being shuffled. My heart raced as I followed Daniel down the narrow hallways toward the small courtroom where everything we had worked toward would finally be made official. The judge greeted us warmly, her kind eyes and soft smile easing some of the tension that had clung to me for weeks. I could feel Emily's small hand slip into mine, her fingers tightening nervously against mine as if drawing strength from my presence. Noah clutched his backpack, shoulders slightly hunched, but I knew he was bracing himself for something important, something that would finally feel real. Daniel took his place beside me and began signing the adoption paperwork. Each signature, each initial, was deliberate and firm. There was no hesitation in his movements, no second-guessing, no pause. I watched him and felt a surge of relief and gratitude. The man who had once questioned trust now embraced it fully, choosing to commit not just on paper, but with his heart. When the judge finally looked at us and smiled, acknowledging our family as complete, Emily squeezed my hand so tightly I could feel her excitement radiating through her tiny fingers. I looked at her, then at Noah, and a wave of emotion washed over me. Noah turned toward Daniel, his eyes wide, full of both awe and courage, and whispered for the very first time, "Dad." The word hung in the air like a promise. A promise made official, yes, but more than that, a promise lived every day from now on. In that small courtroom, surrounded by the quiet authority of law and the gentle warmth of family, I felt the culmination of years of struggle, honesty, and resilience. We had reached the point where love was no longer uncertain, where fear had been faced, and where our family, complete and chosen, could finally breathe together. The days after the adoption were quieter, but far from easy. Trust did not magically return overnight. It had to be rebuilt piece by piece, conversation by conversation, gesture by gesture. Some mornings, Daniel lingered at the kitchen table a little longer, making small talk with Noah and Emily before heading to work. Other nights, we sat together on the couch, sharing thoughts and feelings we had once left unspoken, practicing patience and listening with intent. Each exchange, no matter how small, became a brick in the foundation we were rebuilding. Honesty, once a fragile thread between us, grew into the base for everything we did. I no longer shielded details or sugarcoated the past. When questions arose, I answered openly. When fears emerged, we confronted them together. In doing so, Daniel and I began to understand one another in ways that went beyond mere affection. We began to understand each other as choices, fears, and courage. The household gradually filled again with laughter, shared stories, and the ordinary chaos of family life that felt safer now because it was grounded in truth. I also discovered something deeper in the process. Choosing myself, my values, my boundaries, my children's needs taught my kids something invaluable. They watched me insist on respect, honesty, and love, and they learned that expecting these things was not arrogance, but a standard of care for oneself. They understood that family was not just about proximity or legal ties, but about the consistent mutual choice to show up, to love, and to honor one another. In this new rhythm, our home felt different, stronger, calmer, and full of possibility. We were not perfect, but we were committed. Each day became a quiet affirmation that family was not defined solely by blood or circumstance, but by the deliberate, loving choices we made to protect, nurture, and trust one another. I sit in the living room on a quiet Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through the wide windows and casting soft golden patterns across the hardwood floor. The house is filled with the gentle rhythm of life. Emily is reading aloud in her room. Noah is building a Lego tower in the corner, and Daniel is quietly sipping coffee at the table, scrolling through the morning news. The ordinary sounds feel extraordinary to me now, full of weight and meaning. I reflect on everything that has brought us to this moment. Love is not measured by comfort, ease, or absence of fear. It is proven by choice, the deliberate decisions we make to stay, to trust, and to care, even when the past whispers doubts and the future feels uncertain. That understanding is a lesson I carry with me every day, in every glance, every word, and every shared laugh. If this story moved you, I want to pause and say thank you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to True Life Voices Stories. Sharing these experiences keeps real stories alive and reminds us all that we are not alone in our struggles and triumphs. Your voice matters here. I look around at my family now, and I do not see perfection. There are still flaws, mistakes, and disagreements. But I see commitment, the conscious choice each of us makes to be present, to love fully, and to honor one another. That commitment is stronger than fear, steadier than uncertainty, and more enduring than any past mistakes. And in that truth, I know it is enough. Enough to heal, enough to grow, and enough to carry forward into a life that is ours, chosen and cherished every day.